Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the 10th day of June 2024. The Nigerian Labour Union made a strong statement today. By next tomorrow being Wednesday, we are going to shut down Nigeria again in strike. This is what they said. But however, the federal government has entered a negotiation again with them. As I talk to you, today being the 10th day, Monday of June 2024, the Nigerian Labour Union are in marathon meeting with the federal government. However, I don't know the importance of all this meeting because as far as I'm concerned, even fear will not allow the Labour Union, the Nigerian Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress, fear will not allow them to go or accept any minimum wage that is below 100,000. Fear will not allow them because Nigerians will rise against them. But this is my fear. This strike that they are going to embark on Wednesday, I am afraid that it will be hijacked, definitely. This strike will be hijacked by people and it could turn to, a deadly protest like that of NSAS. So many imams have been warning about this. So many pastors, so many reverend fathers have been warning about this. Yesterday, Father Mbaka was also talking about a crisis that is about to come, that they should not take it lightly as before. However, in this particular video, Reverend Father George Ehusani made a strong statement, warned the federal government about the dangers ahead of this hunger that is looming in Nigeria. If we have a listening government, I think this video you're about to watch alone will be able to change their mind. But I think what is going to happen in Nigeria will happen because these people don't care and they don't listen.
I have been sick of this problem. I have been sick of this controversy over living wage or minimum wage. And I believe that something is seriously wrong with the heads of many of our leaders. How can anyone who earns 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, not to talk of people who earn 1 million, 2 million, how can they go to sleep in good conscience every day? How can they go to sleep in good conscience and come out to sit down in a boardroom to discuss the sustainability or otherwise of paying 60,000 to the poorest of workers? How can we go to bed and sleep, all those who belong to the elite, who earn 2, 3, 4, 500,000, 1 million? How can you go to sleep in good conscience, I say, if you still have any conscience? How can you go to sleep in good conscience and come out to be debating? I hear people on TV, I watch people on TV, experts, economic experts, corporate executives, government officials, who are taking home more than $1 million in a month. And they are there arguing that 60,000 or over will destroy the economy, is not sustainable. How wicked! You give 60,000 to a poor worker, a poor worker who may have a family of 2 or 3 or 4, for his feeding, for his accommodation, for his house rent, for his medical care, for his children's school fees. How wicked! How blind! How can we do that? And we think that God will bless our country. We think that it is by bringing a new national anthem for God to bless our country. How can you commit this crime against humanity? For me, this is a crime against humanity. Because the poor people who cannot afford to buy gari, I'm not saying they will buy that they are to buy sardine. I'm saying buy gari, poor people who cannot buy gari. I'm not talking of meat or fish. Poor people are dying because they have no money to cure malaria. How can you go to sleep in good conscience? Those of us who belong to the elite, how can we go to sleep with good conscience and we are debating and we are discussing and we vote 500 million naira to meet and debate about paying 60,000 to the poor? My dear friends, I see this as a new form of apartheid. Nigeria is one of the most unequal societies in the entire world. A society where it's like the animal farm. A society where we have conspicuously rich people, people who are living in conspicuous consumption, and others who are in deplorable, dehumanizing poverty. If you have somebody in this country that takes home 1 million naira, I mean 1 million, I'm not talking of 30 million naira, 1 million naira in the month, and he can open his mouth to be part of a discussion about the poor getting 60,000 naira. I say anyone who earns up to 1 million naira in the month should keep his or her mouth shut when he hears them debating about taking 60,000 for the poor. More than 60 years after independence, we are running an apartheid society. This time it's not racial apartheid, it's economic apartheid. We are running an apartheid society of people of conspicuous consumption, flying in private jets around at government expense, people who are riding 4, 5, 6, 7 SUVs with pilot vehicles, chasing the poor out of the road, and poor people, you are debating, you are discussing, you are over 60,000 for the poor. You insult the poor by saying 30,000, and later you say 48,000, and now you say 60,000, and you pay more than 60,000, you come out with 62,000. You insult poor Nigerians. I say there is hardly any society I know that is as divided as the Nigerian society. And a society that is so divided is just sitting on a keg of gunpowder. I have warned here before that the revenge of the poor is at the corner. The revenge of the poor is at the corner. I am not calling for it, but it will happen as night follows the day. Because when you so reduce people, you reduce people to this dehumanizing level. Nature does not allow a situation of islands of affluence amidst a sea of poverty. Nature does not allow it. And let me warn those in the elite. Let me warn those in the tripartite committee of government. Let me warn that it is in the course of nature that when a predator continues to devour the very resources that the predator needs for his own sustenance, nature will take out the predator in order to have equilibrium, in order to have a measure of equilibrium. Nature is about balance, you know. All of nature is about balance, and human beings are part of nature.
The leadership of the Nigeria Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress has since re-entered negotiations with the federal government tripartite committee on minimum wage. On Friday night, both sides made varying concessions, with the government proposing 62,000 naira, which was instantly rejected, and the Labour team reviewing downwards their demand from 494,000 naira to 250,000 naira. Dr. Muda Yusuf is an economist and Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. The immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Yusuf, joins me now. Good to have you on This Day Live, Dr. Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati.
Well,
a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Yusuf, we've been quoted as saying that 62,000 naira is too small, and that given high inflation is not going to make any difference. But the governors are saying they won't pay because they can't pay. Some members of the organized private sector are saying, look, this will lead to job losses because they will need to trim down. And I think you were also quoted as saying that there's a lot of redundancy in the public sector. Now, where do we go from here? Because Labour is saying the governors don't know what they are saying. If they don't agree, they should resign their positions. Organized private sector is saying, well, we can't cope. Government is saying we can't do more than 62,000 naira. So why do you say the amount is too small? What do you think is a fair amount from your own calculations?
Well, yes. Let me admit upfront that this is a rather complicated matter because we are looking at quite a number of variables at play. We are looking at what we can call a wage that is minimally desirable given the current cost of living. Because if you take the current 60,000 or 62,000, really, in today's Nigeria, what can that really buy? And it's even more so when you are residing in major cities, like Lagos, like Abuja, like Port Harcourt, and so on. The cost of transport alone will take off not less than 30% of that amount. So how are you going to feed? How are you going to pay rent and all of that? So the realism of the amount within the context of today's economic situation is a major issue. Because in however we look at it, we need to give these things a human face. Already, particularly in the public sector, we are dealing with a major issue of corruption. And when we talk about low wages, I think it's much more predominant in the public sector. The level of corruption in the bureaucracy now has almost been elevated to the level of an entitlement, partly because of this situation. A director in the civil service, maybe in Abuja or something, at best, maybe 500,000. This is somebody who has put in over 30 years post-graduation experience or service. Assistant director is just about 250. How much is a flat in Abuja or Lagos, even if you are staying far away from the city center? So I'm looking at the reality of the amount and what it can do. But again, we need to also look at this within the context of affordability, the context of sustainability, and the context of equity. Affordability in the sense that if you look at the total expenditure of government now, more than half of it is being used to pay salaries. In some states, they are spending close to 70 to 80% of their resources to pay salaries. What happens to the other citizens of the state? In terms of their entitlement to government services, entitlement to roads, education, health, waste management, and so many other things that the government needs to do. Then talk about also the sustainability. How far even if they accede to that, now how far can it go? Now at the beginning of the year, we had a very generous, very optimistic revenue projection. But from what I'm seeing now, the revenue situation is not as optimistic as it was at the beginning of the year. Oil projection, revenue production for oil was about 9 trillion. In anticipation of the fact that, okay, we get some money from subsidy, will improve oil production and so on. But the situation is now looking different. From recent figures, this challenge of subsidy has crept into the revenue situation. So the amount of revenue that is even available to government is not as much as we had anticipated. So the issue of sustainability of all of these things is important. Then we also look at other variables like the issue of redundancy that you talk about. We have a bureaucracy of the public sector that is carrying a lot of redundancy across all levels. Whether you are talking about local government, state government, federal government, many of them can make do with less than 50% of the staff, especially in the mainstream bureaucracy. I'm not talking of those in the teaching service or those who are in the health sector or those who are in security service. So that itself is an issue. Even if you desire to pay more, how do you carry this whole redundancy along with you in the payment of the new wage? So that is possibly that can be a possible trade-off. If you need to improve this remuneration, then some of the staff will have to go so that the level of redundancy can reduce. Then there have been arguments about the cost of governance. Again, can we spend less in governance? Of course, yes. We need to have conversation around that as well. Can we do more in the area of corruption? Yes. We need to have conversation around that. So that is why I'm saying that it's a rather complicated matter. And a whole lot of things need to go together. And in the area of the private sector, for many SMEs, even small business owners, some of them are making losses. Some of them are struggling to even pay their staff as we speak because of the challenges of the economy, the cost of things, the resistance from consumers, weak purchasing power, high energy costs, and so many other high cost of logistics. So this is also taking a toll on businesses, especially the small businesses. So this is the dilemma that we are faced with.
Okay, Dr.
And in the circumstances, then both parties will have to also, understand the reality that we are faced with.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf. The federal government has said 100% increase. It's a fair deal. I guess that's why they've not gone beyond 62,000 naira. Labour is refusing. Labour says we face the risk of another general strike. What do you think will be a fair deal, given all these scenarios that you have painted? Sacking people in the public sector, sacking people in the private sector will, as you know, create his own new set of complications. What do you think will be a fair deal as an economist?
Well, what I think will be a fair deal, particularly at the federal level, because we must also again situate this within the context of ability to pay. Ability to pay varies from state to state. It varies between the federal and the states. It varies from parastatal to parastatal. So that variability, we must make allowance for it. So for me, we'll be looking at maybe between 70 and 80, at least for the federal. Then coming down to the states, maybe at best, maybe 70. I think that is what I think I could consider a fair. It is not as if that is what is desirable. No, they deserve more than that in the light of the current situation. But in the light of current reality of what is sustainable and what will minimize the sacking of workers, then we'll be looking at between 80 to 70. I think that is what I think one can consider something that is a bit more realistic in the current circumstances.
Talked about refloating the economy, that we need to refloat the economy. Can you, outline your specific recommendations in that regard?
No, the point is that in this kind of negotiations, it is not enough to be looking at just the nominal figures. That's looking at how much you to be paid and so on. We are not looking at some of the fundamentals. How do we ensure that we stabilize prices? How do we ensure that even if you have a wage review today, you not come back in the next 1 year to say that the value of the money has been eroded? So we need to look at those fundamentals. What do we need to bring down the cost of food, particularly the cost of living? What kind of fiscal incentives can the government roll out to bring down the cost of living? Those things, in my view, are much more impactful, they are much more inclusive, they are much more sustainable. Only recently, at least, we saw a draft which we have now been told is not authorized. But I saw very interesting, very exciting fiscal policy measures in that draft to bring down the cost of food, to reduce the cost of raw materials, to reduce the cost of clearing cargo at the ports, to provide a window for cheaper credit for businesses and for manufacturers. These are the kind of measures that we need to see, and we need to see them very quickly. In fact, these things should have been on at the point that we are talking about even the fuel subsidy removal, so that we help to cushion the inflationary effect of some of these policy reforms. So I'm thinking more along the line of how we can use fiscal policy measures to moderate or modulate prices or the inflationary pressure. We're already having a lot of pressure already from the monetary side. But just as we have said severally, the monetary policy alone cannot address these issues. We need to see more from the fiscal side. And we are seeing indication that the fiscal measures are coming on board. But we are hoping that it will come on board very, very quickly, because we know that this will go beyond just wage earners. It is something that will impact on everybody. Because there is also the argument that, okay, what is the percentage of these people who want to earn a salary review? They're not more than 5% of the workforce. Then what is in all of this for those who are not on the payroll? So that is why this other leg of the conversation is important. How we can introduce more policies to reduce the cost of production, to liberalize trade as much as possible without hurting domestic production, to provide a better window for financing so that not everybody is accessing credit at 30%. So these are some of the things I think should happen from an economic management point of view to complement, whatever we are doing about this wage review.
Well, Dr. Yusuf, it's good you brought up the two fiscal policy documents released by Mr. Wale Edun, or put in the public domain by Mr. Wale Edun. The one on inflation reduction and what they call accelerated and stabilization advancement plan, ASAP, right? Now, Mr. Ononuga said we should not discuss those two policies because that the media should disregard the two policies because they are not authorized and that they are just draft documents. But you are already saying that you saw certain things in those draft documents that are important. Take, for example, the statement in the ASAP document about 5.4 trillion likely to be spent on fuel subsidy this year. And then the government appears confused about whether there is a fuel subsidy still in operation or not. Now, from a policy-making perspective, what do you make of this, back and forth between different departments of government? A document is released, they say it's not authorized. A document is released, they say it's still a draft. Fuel subsidy, we're not even sure of what is going on. It's a confusion, part of, the pillars of economic management.
Well, first of all, let me say that there's a need to tidy up the apparatus of communication between the government and the people. It is not a good thing that you get, sometimes conflicting information coming from the same government. I think something needs to be done about it so that you can have a much tidier channel of communication. That is one. The second point is that in the policy-making process, in fact, the best practice is to have what we call exposure draft. You are contemplating a policy, you release a draft. An exposure draft, let the citizens debate it. Let them have a conversation around it. And that will help to enrich whatever input that the government want to add to it. It helps to bring a lot of perspectives to that policy. So it's not something wrong that you have a draft policy, you put it in public domain, you allow people to discuss it, to debate it. It benefits the entire policy process. It enriches it. It's not supposed to be a secret document or a classified document. We are talking about economic policy. So I don't see anything, that should be so secretive about it. The fact that you have an exposure draft does not mean that that draft will end up being the final draft. They call it exposure draft. I don't see anything wrong with it. Now, there is this issue of whether there is subsidy, there is no subsidy. Again, there is nothing sacrosanct about subsidy. Because we are talking about the welfare of the people. We started out by removing the subsidy, which was not a bad idea in terms of policy, although there are conversations as to whether the mitigation measures should have come much earlier than we are beginning to see now. But it's the way to go because of the bleeding that the economy was suffering as a result of it. Now, since then till now, most of the variables that are driving the prices, the cost of fuel, those variables have changed. The exchange rate has further depreciated. The oil price have gone up. So naturally, and the price remain fixed, somebody must be picking the bill. It's a no-brainer that somehow subsidy has crept back into the system. And we need to be honest about it. We need to be transparent about it. But should we continue to increase the fuel price? Certainly no. That is why I think the government is also trying to push back. Because there's a social dimension to policy making. It's not just about following the dictates of IMF or World Bank, because we are dealing with human beings. You know the kind of poverty that our people are suffering. And you want the president to now go now and remove whatever is left of the subsidy? These are things that we need to properly interrogate and situate within the context of our own social and economic conditions. So that is what I think should be the situation. I believe that government is, providing some subsidy. That is why the price of fuel had not gone up between, at least within the last 6 months to 1 year, significantly. And I'm hoping that by the time we have domestic refining coming on stream, the situation will gradually reverse. That is my hope.
Okay.
But I am in agreement with the social consideration that has gone into the pricing of PMS, which is why the price has been static, and which is why perhaps this subsidy element has crept into it. Well, I think we should not have any apologies about that.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, let me go back to where we started from, the new national minimum wage argument and all of that. You've talked about capacity to pay. You've talked about sustainability. But one other issue that has been brought up in this conversation is about productivity. That unless we address the challenge of productivity within this economy, just talking about wage indexation, will not take us far. I mean, Labour is saying, well, FAC allocation used to be 700 billion naira for the states. Now it is 1.2 trillion. And that, if they can just cut fat, then the states should be able to pay. But how about productivity? Many of these states are not centers of production. They're just centers of consumption. How do we address productivity to create wealth in a sustainable manner in this economy?
Well, I think it's like a catch-22 situation. You cannot have productivity if you don't create an environment for productivity. Productivity is a function of the quality of manpower. That is investment in education, the right kind of education. And that is not only just about paying salaries, it's also about putting the structures in place to deliver quality education. It's a question of the structural environment. What kind of structural environment have we created for those who want to go into production? Producing in this economy today is a nightmare because of these structural impediments. And you need funding to be able to provide those things. You either get it from your domestic sources of funding, or you go and borrow to be able to do it, or you get the private sector to provide it. These are the options. If you don't have power, you don't have good logistics, it is extremely very difficult to have an economy that is productive. Generally, I believe that we have a very, enterprising population. We have the entrepreneurs. We may have some issues around manpower and things like that. But we need to provide all these other complementary things in order to ensure an environment that is productive. If you spend almost 80% of your resources paying salaries of civil servants, how are you going to create the environment to ensure productivity? How are you going to invest in road infrastructure? How are you going to invest in technology? Are you going to invest in energy development and so on and so forth? So that's why I said it's a catch-22 situation. We need to balance it, but ensuring productivity requires a lot of investment, particularly from the government. It's the government that will create that environment, then the private sector can now latch onto it to be able to deliver products efficiently and competitively. That is the way it works in many other climes. Many governments spend a lot on R&D, for instance, research and development. You don't leave it to just the private sector. The government provides a lot of investment in innovation to support the private sector to be able to come up with new and fantastic and competitive products. So that is my perspective on this issue of productivity and all of that. The environment has to be there to support it.
Well,